Good afternoon, Year 5, and welcome to your history lesson. Last time round, we had a look at what everyday life was like for ancient Egyptians, and you had a really good go at having a look at different household objects that we found and of guessing what they might be for, having a look and seeing all of that information. Today, we're going to look in particular at why the River Nile was so important for ancient Egyptians. So, let's have a look and share my screen. Um, Here is your timeline of key events from the ancient Egyptian period. Pause it and have a look and see if you can remember those different bits and pieces. You don't necessarily need to remember all of them, but they are important to be aware of. And then here is your key vocab for today. So irrigation, which is using trenches to divert the flow of a river so that it supplies crops with water. Fertile is when soil is rich in nutrients, which means that crops can grow well. The River Nile is the river that runs through Egypt and other countries in Africa as well. A shadoof is a long pole with a bucket on the end used to move water, and an excellent word as well. And silos are big storage things that normally hold grain in them. They look huge today. I don't know if they would have looked quite so big back then. Here are your three introductory questions. So give some ways that humans use mountains for tourism. Have a think about the posters that we made to advertise the Alps in our previous unit of learning. What do we think that Stonehenge was used for? Now, I say what do we think because we can't know for sure, but archaeologists have made some guesses based on some evidence. And at what age did children start working in ancient Egypt? So have a go at answering those questions on your template in Teams. And then when you're ready, press play again on the video. Okay, so let's have a look. So some examples of ways that humans use mountains for tourism. You've got skiing, hiking, mountain biking. There are others such as whitewater rafting, which needs that steep incline to happen on. What do we think Stonehenge was used for? We think it was mainly used for religious ceremonies. There is evidence to suggest that that is one of the things it was used for, particularly around solstice times. And at what age did children start working in ancient Egypt? It was at 12 years old. There were only schools in ancient Egypt for children who were going to become scribes or for richer children. So most children were working by the time they were 12 years old. Okay, so a bit of a starter related to your previous learning. It's down as activity 1 in your team's research resources. So how was ancient Egyptian life the same as life today, and how was it different? So some things to think about will be food, jobs, houses, and technology. So have a go at doing that. If you want to stretch yourself, as well as comparing it to today, can you compare it to another ancient civilization? So how was ancient Egyptian life the same as ancient Roman life, and how was it different? How was it the same as ancient Greek life, and how was it different? How was it the same as life in Mayan times, and how was it different? You might need to do a bit of research around that. If you wanted to do that, you might know enough information off the top of your head, but that is your stretch as well. So have a go at that, and then when you've done that, come back to me and we will go on to what your second activity is. Okay, so the River Nile was hugely important to ancient Egyptians, and we've already looked a little bit about it in our first lesson where we looked at the climate of ancient Egypt. And we talked about the fact that Egypt is largely a desert climate, which means it's very hot and it doesn't get very much water. And we can see from our satellite image that around where the River Nile is, particularly at the mouth in the north of the country, there is lots more greenery, which means that that can support the growing crops, which means that they would be able to farm their own food for a whole civilization. So we can make some guesses about how the River Nile was so important to ancient Egypt. And let's have a look at a video which explains a little bit about how they used it. There's some amazing resources online. I'm using a lot of resources from BBC Bitesize, which are accessible to everybody. So if you want to learn more, feel free to go and have a look on there.
A quern for grinding grain to make flour. Wow, that must have been really hard work. These tools are so basic. It's also primitive.
I beg your pardon? Did you say Primitive?
What I meant to say was
This is the cutting edge of farming technology.
more grinding, really.
And I suppose you think it's easy growing wheat and barley in heat like this?
Well, no, but
Well, it's not. We need to know exactly when the river will flood so that we plant our crops at the right time. That way we can take advantage of all the nutrients left behind by the floodwater. We even measure the level of the River Nile to see how much flooding we can expect. We have 3 seasons. Akhet, the flooding season, Peret, the growing season, and Shamu, the harvesting season. During growing season, the fields are ploughed either by hand or with oxen, and we set up a complex network of water channels for irrigating the crops. Otherwise, they would dry out.
wow, that's really clever.
The grain is held in big stores to keep it preserved. We exchange it for other goods like cloth or bread, so the stores are a bit like banks, where we can keep our grain or take it out when we need it.
Cool. So what are you grinding in your quern?
We're making flour for baking bread.
Ow, there's some stone from your quern in my bread.
OK, we're good at farming, but we're not perfect.
Okay, so there you can see some examples of how the River Nile was so important, and particularly in a climate where growing food is difficult, to have the ingenuity to be able to build those irrigation trenches is absolutely incredible. So let me go back to our screen here, and let's have a look at a little bit more information as well. So the ancient Egyptians based their farming around the annual flooding of the River Nile. There were 3 seasons in the Egyptian calendar. Akhet, also called the season of inundation. Heavy summer rain in the highlands of Ethiopia each year would cause the Nile to flood as it flowed through Egypt. Farmland could be covered up by up to 2 meters of water. Peret, also called the season of the emergence. As the floodwaters went down, the land beside the Nile was left covered in thick, dark mud, which was very fertile. Farmers used this season to plant grain, barley, and other fruits and vegetables. And Shimu, also called the season of the harvest. Egyptians harvested the food they had planted, collected seeds to plant the following year, and stored grain in large silos. Most of the annual rising and falling of the Nile, the Egyptians dug channels and walls to divert floodwater away from cities and towards fields for farming. This was called basin irrigation. They also invented tools like the shadoof. A shadoof is a long pole with a bucket attached to the end, which people could use to raise and move water from rivers or lakes onto land. In the UK, we don't need systems like that because we have such regular rainfall that in most places the fields will get enough water, whereas in Egypt, they needed to come up with a way to make sure that those crops had a constant supply of water. So, can you have a go at writing an explanation of how the ancient Egyptians used the River Nile? And there's a few things to try and include. Information about the Nile flooding, an explanation of irrigation. You could do that with diagrams if you'd like to, and you can attach a picture onto Teams. That's absolutely fine. An explanation of the Egyptian seasons. How were their seasons different to the seasons that we have now? And talk about Egypt's climate as well. Why was it so important to get water from the river compared to what we do in the UK? Hopefully you found that interesting. The whole thing with irrigation fascinates me. And there's loads more that you can learn about it online as well. I look forward to reading your explanations, and hopefully you will enjoy doing some research.